Business viewers, maintaining fiscal sustainability is important as it becomes an anchor of macroeconomic stability, which will give a solid ground for sustainable growth. Enhancing fiscal capability will be conducted through creating larger fiscal space and improving spending. Fiscal policy in Indonesia is focused towards addressing the medium-term challenges to achieve sustained growth acceleration as well. We have the report for you. You're watching MNC Business Special Dialogue with UBS. Don't forget to watch our live streaming through www.sindonews.com. You can also watch our program through StarHub Asia Channel 121 in Singapore. Mr. MACKAY, thank you so much for the good start. Now, further to our conversation early on, by the time we talk about investment climate. On UBS standpoint, how would you define actually the word conducive business and investment climate, especially given the context of ASEAN?
Yeah, very good question. I think in terms of the fundamentals that I mentioned earlier, the population growth, there are very strong GDP forecasts for most of the economies in ASEAN, in particular Indonesia. I think almost everyone will have growth forecasts of over 5%. So you've got a strong basic growth. What people then have looked for typically, in ASEAN in particular, has been political stability. And the sense that that regulation is being removed, that businesses can grow. And I think with the recent elections in Jakarta, that was a positive sign for the international community. I think there are a number of interesting questions as to going forward, the ability to work with the Parliament and put through a lot of these much expected reforms that everyone believes will be helpful. And just general management of the economy. Is the current account going to be managed? Is the currency in an acceptable place? And an impression that the country is being sensibly managed, which we feel is.
Global economic impact, by the time we talk about the current global economic slowdown, if I may use that word, not single country or nation can be what you call this what do you call this?
Island.
Isolated, insulated from this kind of impact. What about ASEAN? How well have we managed in terms of creating this kind of a good resilient level in terms of weathering the impact of the global economic slowdown?
Yes, it's a very interesting question because the ASEAN linkages that we're seeing as the increasing integration of the ASEAN economy is a very beneficial thing. And trade amongst ASEAN partners and their other Asian partners does help make these economies more sort of isolated to some extent. But I think that the numbers will show you that the reality is that there is still a lot of linkage with Federal Reserve policy and Federal Reserve interest rates. And we saw that most markedly during the so-called taper tantrum a couple of years ago, where emerging markets did suffer on the fear that the Fed would raise interest rates too soon, too fast. And I think it would be wrong to think that the ASEAN economies are completely removed from the timing and speed of any potential Federal Reserve interest rates. But what's important is that is done in a gradual fashion that is not going to drive money flows, hot money flows out of ASEAN, but enables people to feel that the economic prospects remain strong and that there's no sort of concerns from a liquidity or flight of capital perspective. So it's important that if and when interest rates do begin to rise, that is done in a way that does not scare off capital.
Well, in ASEAN, people in general start questioning about this, especially here in Asia, when we talk about the urgency of creating this kind of market and economic integration under ASEAN Economic Community AEC 2015. Based on the experience of UBS itself, do you see that it signals that we can somehow strengthen our economic power by the time we really realize this kind of AEC integration one day, soon, by the end of 2015, hopefully?
I think there's a lot of great things that people are trying to do in the ASEAN integration. I naturally look a little bit at what happened in Europe and the integration really over the last 50, 60 years of Europe and how you have a very integrated movement of people, goods, services, capital, and for many countries the euro. And I think what ASEAN, the debates about ASEAN integration are how far you go along that path. And it's clear that you should be encouraging mobility of people, and removing barriers to trading goods and services. And I think there are questions once you get that right about how far you go towards more closer financial union, which may or may not occur. But I think the trade in goods and the freedom of people, goods and services and the increasing cooperation is clearly a good thing.
All right, now the session to discuss more about this, Mr. MACKAY. Make sure you are still with us. You are watching MNC Business Special Dialogue with UBS.